The scream that tore from her throat died behind the cruel hand clamped over her mouth, and in that moment, Clara Hayes knew she would either escape the Golden Rose Saloon tonight or die trying. It was the spring of 1876 in Deadwood, Dakota Territory, and the town had exploded with fortune seekers after gold had been discovered in the Black Hills just 2 years prior. Clara had arrived 6 months ago with nothing but a carpetbag and desperation, fleeing a family tragedy back in Ohio that had left her orphaned and penniless at 19 years old. She had thought working as a serving girl in a saloon would be temporary, just until she could save enough money to move on to somewhere respectable, somewhere she could start fresh. But Vincent Blackwood, the owner of the Golden Rose, had other plans for her. Vincent was a man who wore expensive suits and smiled with teeth that never reached his cold gray eyes. He ruled his saloon with an iron fist, and the girls who worked for him knew better than to cross him. Clara had witnessed what happened to those who tried to leave or refused his advances. Martha had disappeared 3 months ago after she threatened to go to the marshal. They found her body in the creek 2 weeks later. The marshal, who took regular payments from Vincent, ruled it an accident. Tonight, Vincent had cornered Clara in the storage room after closing, his whiskey-soaked breath hot against her face as he backed her against the wall. His hands had grabbed at her waist, her arms, and when she tried to push him away, he had struck her hard across the face. The blow had sent her sprawling onto the floor, and as he loomed over her, unbuckling his belt, she had screamed. That was when his hand covered her mouth, and his voice turned deadly. "You will learn your place, girl," he hissed. "You belong to me now. Everything in this saloon belongs to me." But Clara's hand had found a bottle on the floor beside her, and she swung it with every ounce of strength she possessed. The glass connected with Vincent's temple with a sickening crack, and he stumbled backward, blood streaming down his face. She did not wait to see if he would recover. She scrambled to her feet and ran. Through the back door of the saloon, she fled into the muddy streets of Deadwood that never truly slept. Even at this late hour, drunken miners stumbled between establishments, and piano music spilled from open doorways. Clara's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She had no plan, no destination, only the primal need to get as far from Vincent Blackwood as possible. She ran past the hardware store, past the assayer's office, her lungs burning with the effort. Behind her, she could hear shouting. Vincent had recovered, and he would be coming after her. He would send his men, the thugs who enforced his will throughout the town. There was nowhere to hide in Deadwood proper, nowhere Vincent's reach did not extend. Clara's feet carried her toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to forest, and the land began its sharp climb into the mountains. She had no coat, no supplies, nothing but the simple cotton dress she wore and the worn boots on her feet. The night air was cold, and she could see her breath misting before her as she pushed herself up the rocky path that led away from civilization. She did not know how long she ran. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, and her lungs felt like they were filled with fire. Finally, when she could go no further, she collapsed beside a large pine tree, pressing her back against its trunk and trying to quiet her gasping breaths. The lights of Deadwood twinkled below her like fallen stars, and she realized with a mixture of relief and terror just how far she had come. The forest around her was dark and full of sounds she could not identify. Branches creaked in the wind, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, shivering violently. She had escaped Vincent, but she might very well die out here in the wilderness. At least it would be on her own terms. She must have dozed from sheer exhaustion because the next thing she knew, rough hands were shaking her awake. Clara's eyes flew open, and she tried to scream, but a deep voice cut through her panic. "Easy now. I am not going to hurt you." The man crouched before her was enormous, easily the largest man Clara had ever seen. Even in the dim pre-dawn light, she could make out the powerful muscles of his shoulders and arms beneath his buckskin shirt. His hair was dark and fell past his shoulders, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, deep brown and surprisingly gentle as they studied her with concern. "Please," Clara managed through chattering teeth. "Please do not take me back to town." The man's brow furrowed. "You are half frozen and look like you have been through hell itself. I am not taking you anywhere except somewhere warm. Can you walk?" Clara tried to stand, but her legs would not cooperate. Without a word, the mountain man scooped her up in his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. She should have been frightened, should have protested, but something about his steady presence made her feel safer than she had felt in months. "My name is Jacob," he said as he began walking with sure steps through the forest. "Jacob Reed. I have a cabin about a mile from here. We will get you warmed up and fed, and then you can tell me what has you running alone through the mountains in the middle of the night." Clara wanted to respond, wanted to thank him, but exhaustion and relief crashed over her in waves, and darkness claimed her once more. When she woke again, she was lying on a soft bed covered with fur blankets, and warm sunlight streamed through a small window. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, and panic seized her. Then, the events of the previous night came flooding back, and she sat up quickly, looking around. The room was small but well built, with sturdy log walls and a floor made of smooth planks. Through the open doorway, she could see into the main room of the cabin, where a fire crackled cheerfully in a stone fireplace. The smell of cooking meat made her stomach growl loudly. "You are awake!" Jacob appeared in the doorway, and in the full light of day, Clara could see him more clearly. He was probably in his late 20s, with strong, handsome features beneath his beard. His shoulders were impossibly broad, and his arms looked like they could snap a tree trunk in half. Everything about him radiated strength and capability. "How are you feeling?" "I'm alive," Clara said, her voice hoarse. "Thanks to you." Jacob nodded and gestured toward the main room. "There's water in the basin if you want to wash up. I have some stew ready and we should talk." Clara's face flushed hot as she realized she was still wearing her saloon dress, now torn and stained with mud and blood. Some of it was hers, some of it was Vincent's. She must look absolutely wretched. But Jacob's expression held no judgment, only patience. After washing her face and hands and doing her best to make herself presentable, Clara joined Jacob in the main room. He had set out 2 bowls of venison stew and thick slices of bread. She sat at the rough-hewn table and tried to eat slowly, but her hunger got the better of her, and she devoured the meal. Jacob ate more slowly, watching her with those thoughtful brown eyes. When she finally set down her spoon, he spoke. "So tell me what happened, and do not leave anything out. If someone is going to come looking for you, I need to know what we are dealing with." The kindness in his voice, the simple use of "we" instead of "you," made Clara's eyes sting with unexpected tears. She had been alone for so long, fighting to survive on her own, that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone on her side. She told him everything. About losing her parents to cholera back in Ohio, about the uncle who had stolen her inheritance and turned her out with nothing, about coming to Deadwood full of hope that she could make a new start, about Vincent Blackwood and the Golden Rose Saloon, about the other girls who lived in fear, about Martha's death and the marshal who looked the other way. She told him about Vincent's attack and how she had struck him with the bottle. I might have killed him," she finished, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do not know. I just ran." Jacob was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight beneath his beard. When he finally spoke, his voice was hard as granite. "If you did kill him, it was in defense of yourself, and any decent man would call it justified. But men like that tend to be hard to kill. More likely you just wounded him and made him very angry." "He will send people after me," Clara said, fear tightening her throat. "He has men who do his dirty work, and he owns the marshal. There's nowhere in Deadwood I can hide." "Then you will stay here," Jacob said simply. "At least until we figure out what to do next." Clara stared at him. "You do not even know me. Why would you help me?" Jacob's expression softened. "I know you are a young woman in trouble who needs help. That's enough. I live up here by myself because I prefer solitude, but that does not mean I have lost my sense of right and wrong. You will stay here, and if anyone comes looking for you, they will have to go through me first." The absolute certainty in his voice sent a shiver down Clara's spine, but not from fear. For the first time since coming to Deadwood, she felt truly protected. Over the next few days, Clara learned more about her unlikely rescuer. Jacob Reed had come to the Black Hills 3 years ago, not for gold like most men, but to escape the memories of the war. He had fought for the Union and had seen things that still haunted him. The solitude of the mountains, he said, was the only thing that brought him peace. He made his living by trapping and hunting, selling furs and meat in the various mining camps and smaller settlements that dotted the hills. He avoided Deadwood itself, preferring to deal with the smaller operations where men were more honest and life was simpler. His cabin was a testament to his skill and self-sufficiency. He had built it himself from logs he had cut and stripped, and every piece of furniture inside had been crafted by his own hands. He kept a large garden in the clearing behind the cabin where he grew vegetables, and he had a small smokehouse for preserving meat. He was, Clara realized, completely independent from the world below. Jacob gave Clara the bedroom and slept on a pallet near the fireplace. Every night, she would wake to find him sitting just outside her door, his rifle across his knees, standing guard. When she asked him about it, he simply said, "I told you anyone who wants to get to you will have to go through me." I meant it. His protectiveness should have felt stifling, but instead it made Clara feel cherished in a way she had never experienced before. No one had ever cared enough to guard her sleep, to ensure her safety above their own comfort. During the days, Jacob taught her the skills she would need to survive in the mountains. He showed her how to identify edible plants, how to set snares for rabbits, how to read the weather in the clouds and the behavior of animals. Clara proved to be a quick study, and she threw herself into learning with determination. She refused to be helpless, refused to be a burden. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk. Jacob was not a man of many words, but what he said carried weight. He told her about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about losing his parents to a fever when he was 16, about joining the army because he believed in preserving the Union. He told her about the battles he had fought, though he spared her the worst details. She could see the pain in his eyes when he spoke of those years, and she understood why he sought peace in the wilderness. Clara, in turn, told him about her life before tragedy struck, about her father who had been a schoolteacher, and her mother who had the most beautiful singing voice, about Sunday picnics and books read by lamplight and dreams of becoming a teacher herself one day. Talking about those happy memories hurt, but it also helped to keep them alive. 2 weeks after Clara's arrival, Jacob returned from checking his trap lines with news. "I spoke with a trader who had come up from one of the camps. Vincent Blackwood is alive and very angry. He has put out word that he is looking for a girl who stole from him and attacked him without cause. He is offering a reward for information." Clara's blood ran cold. "How much?" $50, Jacob said grimly. "Enough to tempt some men." "I've put you in danger," Clara said, standing abruptly. "I should leave. I should head further into the mountains or try to make it to another territory." Jacob stood as well, and his hand caught her arm gently but firmly. "You are not going anywhere. You would not last 3 days alone out there, and you know it. We will figure this out together." "But if they find me here, they will hurt you too," Clara protested. Jacob's laugh was harsh. "Let them try. I did not survive Shiloh and Gettysburg to be frightened by some saloon owner's hired thugs." The confidence in his voice was absolute, and Clara felt her panic begin to subside. She looked up at him, really looked at him, and saw not just strength, but genuine care in his eyes. He was not protecting her out of obligation or for reward. He was doing it because he wanted to, because somewhere in the past 2 weeks, she had become important to him. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Jacob's expression softened, and his thumb brushed gently over the bruise on her cheek, the mark Vincent had left that was finally beginning to fade. "You do not need to thank me, Clara. I'm just glad I found you when I did." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them had words for yet. Then Jacob stepped back, clearing his throat. "I will keep a closer watch, and I think it is time I taught you how to shoot." Over the next week, Jacob trained Clara in the use of firearms. She started with his smaller rifle, learning how to load, aim, and fire. The kickback bruised her shoulder and the noise hurt her ears, but she persisted. Jacob was a patient teacher, adjusting her stance and her grip with gentle hands, his praise genuine when she began to hit her targets. "You are a natural," he said after she successfully shot a tin can off a fence post. "Better than most men I have seen." Clara flushed with pride. For so long she had felt powerless, at the mercy of circumstance and cruel men. But here, learning to protect herself, she felt strong. As spring deepened into early summer, the mountains came alive with color and life. Wildflowers bloomed in brilliant profusion, and the days grew warm and long. Clara found herself settling into a rhythm of life at the cabin that felt more like home than anywhere she had lived since her parents died. She tended the garden, pulling weeds and watering the growing plants. She learned to cook over the open fire, and Jacob declared her cornbread better than any he had ever tasted. She mended his clothes with the sewing kit he kept, and in the evenings she would read aloud from his small collection of books while he worked on repairing tools or crafting new ones. It was a simple life, but it was peaceful, and increasingly Clara found her eyes drawn to Jacob, watching the way the firelight played across his strong features, the way his hands moved with such certainty and skill, the gentle way he spoke to her even when he was gruff with the rest of the world. She thought he might feel the same. She caught him watching her sometimes, his gaze intense and unreadable. His fingers would linger when he handed her something, and he always seemed to find reasons to stand close to her. But he never said anything, never acted on whatever might be building between them. Clara told herself it was better that way. She was a burden on him, a danger to his peaceful life. She had no right to hope for anything more than his protection and friendship. But her heart had other ideas. One afternoon in late June, Jacob came back from checking the trap lines earlier than expected, his expression troubled. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "There are 3 men making camp about 5 miles from here. They are asking questions at the mining camps, looking for a girl matching your description." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "Vincent's men." "Most likely," Jacob agreed. "They have not found this place yet, but it is only a matter of time. The miners know I'm up here, and someone might mention it." "What do we do?" Clara asked, fighting to keep the tremor from her voice. Jacob was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "We could try to wait them out, but that could take weeks, and I do not like being cornered. Or we could take the fight to them." "Take the fight to them?" Clara repeated. "What do you mean?" "I mean I go down there and explain to them, in terms they will understand, that you are under my protection, and they need to leave." Jacob's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "They will kill you," Clara said, her heart clenching with fear. "There are 3 of them." "I have faced worse odds," Jacob said simply. Then his expression softened, and he reached out to cup her cheek with his large, calloused hand. "Clara, I need you to trust me. I will not let them take you. I swear it." The touch of his hand, the intensity in his eyes, made Clara's breath catch. "Jacob, I cannot lose you. I cannot." Something shifted in his expression, and for a moment, Clara thought he might say something important, something that would change everything between them. But then he dropped his hand and stepped back. "You will not lose me, I promise. But I need you to stay here and stay armed. If anyone comes to this cabin who is not me, you shoot first and ask questions later. Understood?" Clara nodded, even though everything in her wanted to protest, to beg him not to go. But she could see the determination in his face and knew that arguing would be pointless. Jacob spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. He checked his weapons, loaded extra ammunition, and sharpened his hunting knife. Clara watched him work, memorizing every detail of his face, his movements, terrified that this might be the last time she saw him. As the sun began to set, Jacob saddled his horse, a sturdy mountain-bred mare named Sable. He secured his rifle to the saddle and tucked his pistol into his belt. Then he turned to Clara, who stood on the porch, her arms wrapped around herself. "I will be back by morning," he said. "I promise you." "Be careful," Clara whispered. "Please be careful." Jacob stepped close to her, and his hands came up to frame her face. For a long moment, he just looked at her, and Clara could see everything he had not said written in his eyes. Then, before she could react, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I will come back to you," he said against her skin. "I have something I need to say when this is over." Then he was mounting Sable and riding down the mountain, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Clara stood on the porch long after he was gone, her hand pressed to the spot where his lips had touched her skin, tears streaming down her face. The night that followed was the longest of Clara's life. She tried to sleep but could only manage brief, fitful dozes plagued by nightmares. She sat by the fire with Jacob's smaller rifle across her lap, jumping at every sound. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. When the first light of dawn began to color the sky and Jacob had still not returned, Clara's fear transformed into bone-deep terror. Something had gone wrong. He was hurt or captured, or worse. She could not just sit here and wait anymore. She was just standing, preparing to saddle the old mule Jacob kept for hauling supplies, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. Clara ran to the window, her heart in her throat, and nearly collapsed with relief when she saw Jacob riding up the path. She burst out the door and ran to meet him as he dismounted. He looked exhausted, and there was blood on his shirt, but he was alive and whole. Without thinking, Clara threw herself into his arms, and he caught her easily, holding her tight against his broad chest. "You are all right," she sobbed. "Thank God you are all right." "I told you I would come back," Jacob said, his voice rumbling in his chest beneath her ear. "Clara, I'm fine. I am here." She pulled back just enough to look up at him, her hands running over his chest and arms, checking for injuries. "You are bleeding." "It is not mine," Jacob said. "Well, not much of it anyway. I took a graze on my arm, but it is nothing serious." He held up his left arm, and Clara could see where a bullet had torn through his shirt and left a furrow in his bicep. It was still bleeding sluggishly. "Inside," she ordered. "Right now. I need to clean and bandage that." Jacob allowed himself to be led into the cabin, and he sat patiently while Clara tended to his wound with hands that shook slightly. As she worked, he told her what had happened. "I found their camp easily enough. 3 men, just like I thought. I recognized one of them from Deadwood, an enforcer who works for Blackwood. I did not bother with pleasantries. I told them they were looking for someone who was not going to be found, and they needed to take that message back to Blackwood and leave these mountains." "And they just agreed?" Clara asked skeptically. Jacob's smile was grim. "Not exactly. One of them went for his gun. I am faster. After he went down with a bullet in his shoulder, the other 2 were more willing to listen. I explained that if Blackwood sent anyone else into these mountains looking for you, they would not be coming back at all. I also suggested that it might be in Blackwood's best interest to forget you ever existed, seeing as how he does not want the territorial authorities asking questions about how he treats the women in his employ." "Will they listen?" Clara asked, tying off the bandage. "The man I shot will need a doctor, so they will be heading back to Deadwood. Whether Blackwood listens to the warning or not remains to be seen. But I made it very clear that I am willing to kill to protect you. Most men, even cruel ones, understand that kind of certainty." Clara sank into the chair across from him, overwhelmed with relief and something else, something warmer and more powerful. "You could have been killed. For me." Jacob reached across the table and took her hand in his much larger one. "Clara, I need to tell you something. I was going to wait until this was over, but I cannot keep it inside any longer." Clara's heart began to pound. "What is it?" "These past 2 months with you here have been the best of my life," Jacob said, his brown eyes locked on hers with burning intensity. "When I came to these mountains, I thought I wanted solitude. I thought being alone was the only way I could find peace after everything I saw in the war. But you changed that. You brought light and warmth into my life, and the thought of you leaving, of going back to that world down there without me to protect you, tears me apart." "Jacob," Clara breathed, hardly daring to hope. "I am not a man of pretty words," he continued. "I am rough and I am scarred, and I live a hard life in these mountains. But I am a man who knows what he wants, and what I want is you. I want you to stay here with me, not as someone I am protecting, but as my wife, if you will have me." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Jacob, I will have you. I love you. I think I have loved you since the night you found me half frozen and carried me to safety." Jacob stood, pulling her up with him, and then she was in his arms again. But this time, when he lowered his head, his lips found hers in a kiss that was gentle and fierce all at once. Clara wrapped her arms around his neck, kissing him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside, and felt his powerful arms tighten around her waist, lifting her onto her toes. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret this choice. I swear it to you." "I could never regret choosing you," Clara said, her fingers threading through his long hair. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved." They spent the rest of that day and the next wrapped in the joy of their new understanding. Jacob was tender and attentive, and Clara marveled at how a man so strong and dangerous could be so gentle with her. He kissed her often, as though making up for lost time, and she reveled in the feeling of being cherished. But their happiness was shadowed by the knowledge that the threat from Vincent Blackwood still loomed. A week after Jacob's confrontation with the hired men, a friend of his from one of the mining camps brought troubling news. Vincent had not heeded the warning. Instead, he was gathering more men, claiming that Jacob Reed had kidnapped one of his girls and he meant to get her back. "He is talking about bringing a dozen men up into these mountains," Jacob's friend, an older miner named Tom, said over coffee. "Says he's going to burn you out if he has to." Jacob's jaw tightened. "Then we need to make sure it does not come to that." After Tom left, Jacob and Clara sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. "We cannot keep living like this," Clara said quietly. "Always looking over our shoulders, waiting for Vincent to make his move." "No, we cannot," Jacob agreed, "which is why I've been thinking. We need to take this out of Blackwood's hands entirely." "What do you mean?" Clara asked. Jacob was quiet for a moment, then said, "The territorial authorities in Yankton have been trying to clean up some of the lawlessness in the Black Hills. They want to establish proper order, especially now that the area is drawing so much attention with the gold strikes. If we could get your story to them, along with information about Blackwood's other crimes, they might send a marshal to investigate." "But how would we get to Yankton?" Clara asked. "That is hundreds of miles from here." "We would have to travel there ourselves," Jacob said. "It would take weeks and it would be dangerous. But I think it is our best chance at ending this for good. Once the territorial authorities are involved, Blackwood will have to answer for what he has done. And you would be free." Clara considered this. The journey would indeed be perilous, but Jacob was right. It was their best hope of building a real future together, one not overshadowed by constant fear. "When would we leave?" "As soon as possible," Jacob said, "before Blackwood can organize his men and come up here in force. We will pack light and move fast." They spent the next 2 days preparing for the journey. Jacob loaded his saddlebags with supplies: dried meat, flour, coffee, ammunition. He filled canteens with fresh water and rolled up bedrolls and blankets. Clara helped him, her movements efficient despite her nervousness. On the morning they were set to leave, Jacob did something that surprised her. He led her to a small clearing behind the cabin where wildflowers grew in profusion, and he took both her hands in his. "I know we said we would marry once this business with Blackwood was settled," he said, "but I do not want to wait. I do not want you to face whatever is coming as anything less than my wife." Clara's eyes widened. "You want to marry me now? Here?" "If you will have me," Jacob said. "I know it will not be a church wedding with a preacher and witnesses, but out here, a man and a woman can speak vows before God and be just as married as if they had done it in a cathedral. What matters is the promise we make to each other." Clara felt tears prick her eyes again. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I want that more than anything." So there, in the clearing with the mountains rising around them and the sky impossibly blue overhead, Jacob Reed and Clara Hayes spoke their vows. Jacob promised to love and protect her, to provide for her, to cherish her all the days of his life. Clara promised to stand beside him, to be his partner and his helpmeet, to love him through whatever trials they might face. When they had finished, Jacob produced a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. It was the only thing he had carried from his old life, and he slipped it onto Clara's finger with hands that shook slightly. Then he kissed her, a kiss full of promise and commitment, and Clara knew that whatever happened next, she would face it as his wife. They set out that afternoon, Jacob on Sable and Clara on the mule, which Jacob had named Stubborn for obvious reasons. They traveled east, keeping to the high country where they were less likely to encounter other people. Jacob set a steady pace, and Clara did her best to keep up, though she was not accustomed to such long hours in the saddle. Each night, they would make camp in some sheltered spot, and Jacob would build a small fire for cooking. Then he would spread out the bedrolls side by side, and they would lie together under the stars. Jacob was careful with her, always making sure she was comfortable and warm, and Clara fell more in love with him with each passing day. On the 4th day of their journey, they had their first real scare. They had stopped at a creek to water the animals when Clara spotted riders in the distance, at least 6 of them heading in their direction. "Jacob," she said urgently, pointing. Jacob saw them immediately and swore under his breath, "We need to move, now!" They mounted quickly and urged the animals into the cover of the trees, pushing them as fast as they dared over the rough terrain. Behind them, Clara could hear shouts. The riders had spotted them. "Can we outrun them?" she called to Jacob. "Not for long," he called back, "but there is a place up ahead, a narrow canyon. If we can reach it, I can hold them off there." They rode hard, branches whipping at their faces and arms. Clara clung to Stubborn's mane, praying that the sure-footed mule would not stumble. Behind them, the shouts grew louder. The riders were gaining. Just when Clara thought they would be overtaken, the canyon Jacob had mentioned came into view. It was a narrow defile between two high rock walls, just wide enough for a single horse and rider. Jacob led the way in, and once they were through the narrowest section, he pulled up and dismounted. "Stay back here with the animals," he ordered Clara, his voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. "And if anything happens to me, you ride. You ride hard for Yankton and do not look back. Promise me." "Jacob, no," Clara protested. "Promise me," he said fiercely. "I promise," Clara whispered, though she knew she could never keep that promise if it came down to it. Jacob positioned himself at the mouth of the canyon with his rifle ready. Within minutes, the riders appeared, and Clara recognized one of them as the man who had been with Vincent the night he attacked her, a cruel-faced individual named Sykes. "That is far enough," Jacob called out, his voice carrying easily in the canyon. "Turn around and ride back to Deadwood." Sykes pulled up, and the other riders spread out behind him. "Vincent Blackwood wants his girl back, Reed. Hand her over, and we will let you live." "She is not his girl. She is my wife," Jacob said, and Clara felt a thrill at hearing him claim her so publicly. "And she's not going anywhere with you. So I will say it one more time. Turn around and leave." "There are 6 of us and 1 of you," Sykes said. "You cannot win this fight." "Maybe not," Jacob said, "but I guarantee you I will take at least 3 of you with me, and you will be the first. So you need to ask yourself, is Blackwood paying you enough to die today?" There was a long, tense silence. Clara could see the other riders exchanging glances, their resolve wavering. Sykes himself looked uncertain. Jacob stood like a statue, his rifle steady, every line of his body radiating deadly intent. Finally, one of the riders spoke up. "I did not sign on to get killed over some saloon girl. Blackwood can fight his own battles." He turned his horse and began riding away. Another followed, then another. Within moments, only Sykes and one other man remained. Sykes glared at Jacob with pure hatred, but eventually he too turned his horse around. "This is not over, Reed," he called back. "Blackwood will not let this go." "Then he will die," Jacob said simply. "Tell him that." They waited in the canyon until the riders were completely out of sight, and then Jacob finally lowered his rifle. His hands were steady, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the tight set of his jaw. She ran to him, and he caught her in his arms, holding her tightly. "That was too close," he said against her hair. "We need to move faster." They pushed on through the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Deadwood. It was grueling, and both they and the animals were exhausted, but they did not dare stop for more than brief rests. A week later, bone-weary and trail-worn, they finally crossed into Wyoming territory. Jacob knew of a small settlement there, a place called Cedar Ridge, where they could rest and resupply before continuing to Yankton. More importantly, Cedar Ridge had a proper lawman, a deputy marshal who was known to be honest and incorruptible. When they rode into Cedar Ridge, Clara felt like she could finally breathe again. The settlement was small but neat, with a few dozen buildings clustered around a main street. They found the marshal's office easily enough, and Jacob tied the horses to the rail outside. Inside, they found Deputy Marshal William Hayes, a grizzled man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened carefully as Jacob and Clara told their story, his expression growing increasingly grim. "I have heard of this Vincent Blackwood," Hayes said when they had finished. "There have been complaints before, but never anyone willing to testify. The marshal in Deadwood is in Blackwood's pocket, so nothing ever comes of it." "Will you help us?" Clara asked. Hayes studied them both for a long moment, then nodded. "I will send a telegram to the territorial authorities in Yankton. They will want to hear your testimony, Mrs. Reed. And if what you say is true, they will send someone to clean up the situation in Deadwood." "It is all true," Clara said, "every word." Hayes wrote out the telegram, and they waited anxiously while it was sent. 2 hours later, a reply came back. The territorial governor himself was taking an interest in the case. He was sending a federal marshal to Cedar Ridge to interview Clara and then proceed to Deadwood to investigate Blackwood. "Looks like you started something big, Mrs. Reed," Hayes said with a slight smile. "The territory has been wanting an excuse to deal with the corruption in Deadwood, and you have given them exactly what they need." Clara and Jacob stayed in Cedar Ridge for the next week, renting a room at the small boarding house and finally getting some proper rest. The federal marshal, a competent man named Garrett, arrived on the third day and took Clara's detailed statement. He assured them that Blackwood would be arrested and brought to trial. "You are a brave woman," Marshal Garrett told Clara. "Not many would be willing to stand up against someone like Blackwood." "I am only brave because I have Jacob," Clara said, looking at her husband with love in her eyes. Marshal Garrett smiled. "You are lucky to have each other. Now, you folks should go on and live your lives. We will handle things from here." 2 weeks later, word reached Cedar Ridge that Vincent Blackwood had been arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including murder in the death of Martha and assault against Clara. Several other women had come forward once they heard that Clara had escaped, and their combined testimonies were more than enough to ensure Blackwood would hang. The corrupt marshal of Deadwood had been removed from his position, and a new, honest lawman had been appointed. The Golden Rose Saloon had been shut down, and the girls who worked there had been helped to find respectable employment. It was over. Finally, truly over. Jacob and Clara decided to stay in Cedar Ridge rather than return to the cabin in the Black Hills. The settlement was growing, and Jacob found work as a deputy to Marshal Hayes, putting his skills and experience to good use. Clara began working with the town's school teacher, helping to educate the children of the settlement, finally pursuing the dream she had thought lost forever. They built a small house on the edge of town, and Jacob added room by room as they needed it. For the first year, it was just the two of them, learning the rhythms of married life, building a foundation of love and trust that would sustain them through whatever came. Their first child, a son they named James after Jacob's father, was born in the spring of 1878. Jacob was terrified during Clara's labor, pacing like a caged animal until the midwife finally brought out the squalling, red-faced baby and placed him in Jacob's arms. The look of wonder on her husband's face brought tears to Clara's eyes. "He is perfect," Jacob whispered, touching James's tiny hand with one massive finger. "You are perfect. Thank you for giving me this." "We made him together," Clara said softly. "He is ours." Jacob was a devoted father, gentle despite his size and strength. He would rock James for hours, singing old songs from his childhood in a surprisingly tuneful voice. He built a cradle with his own hands, carved with intricate designs of mountains and forests, and he never missed an opportunity to tell his son how much he was loved. When James was 2, Clara gave birth to twin girls, and their little house became filled with the chaos and joy of 3 small children. Jacob added more rooms, and Clara managed the household with efficiency, born of determination and love. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters when supplies ran low, and there were illnesses that tested their faith and strength. But through it all, Jacob and Clara faced everything together, their love growing deeper with each passing year. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jacob took Clara back to the cabin in the mountains where they had first fallen in love. They left the children with trusted friends in Cedar Ridge and rode up into the hills, following the familiar paths. The cabin was still standing, though it showed signs of neglect. Jacob had occasionally come up to check on it over the years, but it had been a long time since anyone had lived there. They cleaned it up and built a fire, and that night they sat on the porch, just as they had all those years ago, watching the sunset over the mountains. "Do you ever regret it?" Jacob asked quietly. "Tying yourself to me? You could have gone anywhere, been anything." Clara looked at him, at the silver that was beginning to thread through his dark hair, at the lines that time and laughter had carved around his eyes, and she felt her heart swell with love. "I chose you," she said firmly. "Out of all the possibilities in the world, I chose you, and I would make that choice again every single day. You are my home, Jacob Reed. You always have been." Jacob pulled her close, and she rested her head on his broad shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "I love you," he said, "more than I have words to express. You took a man who thought he was beyond saving and gave him a reason to live again. We saved each other, Clara said softly. That night I ran into the mountains. I thought I was running toward death, but I was actually running toward life, toward you. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would last a lifetime. As the years continued to pass, Jacob and Clara watched their children grow into fine young adults. James became a lawman like his father, serving as a deputy in Cedar Ridge, and eventually taking over as marshal when William Hayes retired. The twins, Sarah and Elizabeth, both became teachers, carrying on the legacy Clara had started. Jacob eventually retired from active duty as a deputy, but he remained a respected voice in the community. He spent his days working in the large garden behind their house, building furniture to sell or give as gifts, and doting on the grandchildren who came along in due time. Clara continued teaching until she was in her 60s, beloved by generations of children who passed through her classroom. She never forgot what it felt like to be powerless and afraid, and she made it her mission to ensure that every child, especially the girls, knew they had value and potential. On quiet evenings, they would sit together on the porch of their house, holding hands and watching the sunset over the mountains in the distance. Their children and grandchildren would often join them, filling the house with noise and laughter and love. Jacob never stopped being protective of Clara, even when they were both old and gray. He would still walk her to the schoolhouse in the mornings, and he would be waiting to walk her home in the afternoons. He still stood guard over her, in his own way, watching over her safety and happiness with the same dedication he had shown that first night when he sat outside her bedroom door with a rifle across his knees. And Clara never stopped being grateful for the man who had saved her, who had loved her, who had given her a life beyond anything she could have imagined when she fled into the night all those years ago. In the summer of 1916, as they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered to honor them. James stood and raised a glass in toast. "To our parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who showed us what true love looks like, who taught us that strength is not just in muscles, but in character, who proved that from the darkest moments can come the brightest joy." Everyone raised their glasses and cheered, and Clara looked at Jacob with tears in her eyes. He smiled at her, that same gentle smile that had first made her feel safe all those years ago, and squeezed her hand. "Best decision I ever made was climbing that mountain the night I found you," he said softly, so only she could hear. "Best decision I ever made was running," Clara replied, "because it brought me to you." That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Jacob and Clara lay in bed together, her head resting on his chest as it had so many thousands of nights before. Jacob's arms were wrapped around her, still strong despite his 70 years, and Clara felt the same sense of safety and love that she had always felt in his embrace. "Jacob," she said softly. "Yes, my love?" "Thank you for standing guard at my door. Thank you for standing guard over my heart all these years." Jacob pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "It has been my honor and my joy. Now sleep. I will keep watch." Clara smiled and closed her eyes, secure in the knowledge that she was loved, protected, and cherished. The scared girl who had fled into the mountains was gone, replaced by a woman who had built a beautiful life with the man she loved. Jacob held her close as she drifted off to sleep, his eyes on the window, where moonlight filtered through the curtains. Even after 40 years, he could not quite break the habit of watching over her, of making sure she was safe. It was who he was, what he had promised her all those years ago in the clearing behind his cabin. The years had been kind to them, kinder than either had dared to hope. They had built something precious together, something that would outlast them in the lives of their children and grandchildren, and through it all, through every trial and triumph, they had faced it together, bound by a love that had been forged in hardship and tempered by time into something unbreakable. As Clara's breathing deepened into sleep, Jacob allowed himself to relax, though part of him remained always alert, always protective. This was his purpose, his calling, the thing that gave his life meaning beyond anything else. He had been a soldier once, and he had been a loner, but he had found his true role when he became Clara's protector, her husband, her partner in all things. He thought back to that night when he had found her half frozen and terrified beneath the pine tree. At the time, he had thought he was just doing what any decent man would do, helping someone in need. He had not known that he was finding the other half of his soul, the woman who would transform his life from mere existence into something vibrant and purposeful. The mountain man who had wanted nothing but solitude had discovered that what he really needed was someone to protect, someone to love, someone to build a life with. And the scared girl fleeing a cruel man had discovered her own strength, her own worth, and the kind of love that only comes once in a lifetime. Their story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic declarations, though it had its share of both. It was a story of steady devotion, of showing up for each other day after day, year after year. It was a story of building something together from nothing, of creating beauty out of hardship, of turning two broken people into one strong whole. In the darkness of their bedroom, with his wife safe in his arms and his family sleeping peacefully under roofs he had helped build, Jacob Reed allowed himself a moment of profound gratitude. He had survived a war and carved a life from the wilderness, but his greatest accomplishment was the love he shared with Clara, the family they had created, the legacy they would leave behind. And as he finally let sleep claim him, his arms still wrapped protectively around the woman who had given him everything, Jacob knew that he would do it all again. Every hardship, every danger, every moment of fear and uncertainty, he would face it all again for the chance to love Clara Hayes Reed, the bravest woman he had ever known. Their story had begun with an escape in the night and a mountain man standing guard at a bedroom door. It had grown into a lifetime of love, laughter, tears, and triumph. And as the moon traced its path across the Wyoming sky and the mountains stood eternal watch in the distance, their story continued in the hearts of all who knew them, a testament to the power of love to transform and redeem, to heal and strengthen, to endure through all things. The years continued their gentle march, and Jacob and Clara grew old together with grace and dignity. They faced the inevitable losses that come with age, the passing of friends and the aches of aging bodies, but they faced them together, their hands clasped, their faith unshaken. When Jacob was 75, he fell ill with pneumonia one harsh winter. Clara nursed him with the same fierce determination she had shown in everything else, refusing to leave his side, forcing him to eat and drink even when he had no appetite. And Jacob, true to form, fought his way back to health because he could not bear the thought of leaving her alone. "You are not allowed to die before me," Clara informed him sternly when he was finally on the mend. "I did not save you from dying of loneliness in those mountains just to have you abandon me now." Jacob laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "Yes, madam, I would not dare." When Clara fell and broke her arm at 72, Jacob carried her to the doctor just as he had carried her to his cabin all those years ago, his strength undiminished by age when it came to protecting her. He stayed by her side through the healing process, helping her dress and eat and managing all the tasks that her injured arm could not perform. Their devotion to each other became legendary in Cedar Ridge. The younger couples would look to them as an example of what marriage should be, and Jacob and Clara would simply smile and hold hands, knowing that what they had was special but not unique. Love like theirs was available to anyone willing to fight for it, to work for it, to choose it day after day. On a warm spring day in 1920, as Jacob approached his 80th birthday, he and Clara sat on their porch watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard. James had given them several grandchildren, and those grandchildren were now having children of their own. The family had grown large and sprawling, a tree with deep roots and spreading branches. "We did well," Clara said softly, watching a little girl with her hair spin in circles, laughing with pure joy. "We did," Jacob agreed. His hand found hers automatically, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture that had not changed in over 40 years. "Do you remember the night you found me?" "Every detail," Jacob said. "You were wearing a blue dress, torn and muddy. Your face was bruised and you were shaking so hard I could hear your teeth chattering. But your eyes, even then your eyes were fierce. You were terrified, but you were not defeated." "I was ready to die," Clara admitted. "I thought freezing in the mountains was preferable to what Vincent would do if he caught me." "I know," Jacob said. "That is why I could not leave you there. That is why I had to protect you." "And you have," Clara said, "every day since. You gave me a life I never thought I could have. You gave me safety and love and a family. You gave me everything." Jacob turned to look at her. His brown eyes still warmed despite the years. "You gave me just as much, more even. You gave me purpose. You gave me a reason to be more than just a man hiding from his past in the wilderness. You made me better." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children play, feeling the warm sun on their faces. The mountains rose in the distance, eternal and unchanging, the same mountains where their story had begun. "Jacob," Clara said after a while. "Yes, my love?" "I'm tired," she said softly. "Not unhappy. Just tired." Jacob understood. They were both old, and the years weighed heavily despite their strong spirits. "I know," he said, "but not yet. We still have time." And they did. They had another 5 years together, 5 precious years of watching their family grow, of sharing quiet moments and gentle touches, of loving each other with a depth that only decades of devotion could bring. When Clara finally passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 84, Jacob was holding her hand. She simply did not wake up one spring morning, slipping away as gently as falling asleep. Jacob sat beside her for a long time, tears streaming down his weathered face, his large hand still clasping her delicate one. "Thank you," he whispered to her still form. "Thank you for everything. Thank you for running into those mountains. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for loving me. Wait for me. I will not be long." He was right. Without Clara, Jacob's fierce will to live faded. He continued for 6 months, long enough to see all his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren one more time, long enough to put his affairs in order and make sure everyone knew how much he loved them. But his heart had been buried with his wife, and on a cold autumn morning, Jacob Reed closed his eyes and did not open them again. They buried him next to Clara in the cemetery overlooking the mountains. Their children made sure the headstone was large and sturdy, carved from granite that would last for generations. The inscription was simple: Jacob Reed, 1841-1925, Clara Hayes Reed, 1841-1925. Together in life, together in eternity. Their love was their legacy, and it was true. Their love lived on in the dozens of descendants who carried their blood and their values. It lived on in the stories told and retold at family gatherings, of how a frightened girl fleeing evil had run into the arms of a mountain man who stood guard at her door and won her heart. It lived on in the way those descendants treated their own spouses, with the same devotion and respect that Jacob and Clara had shown each other. Years later, long after anyone who had known them personally had passed away, a great-great-granddaughter of Jacob and Clara would visit their graves with her own husband. She would tell him the story as it had been passed down through the generations, of courage and protection, of love that overcame all obstacles. They were married for 47 years, she would say, her hand resting on the weathered stone, and every single day he loved her like it was the first day. Every single day she chose him. "That is the kind of love I want to have with you." Her husband would take her hand, looking at the graves of 2 people he had never met but who had somehow shaped his life through the legacy they left behind. "Then, that is what we will build," he would promise, "together." And so the circle would continue, generation after generation, all of them touched by the love story that began on a desperate night in 1876, when a cruel saloon owner drove a young woman into the mountains, and a lonely mountain man found his purpose in protecting her. It was a love story forged in hardship and refined by time, a love story that proved that the best things in life come from choosing each other, day after day, through every trial and triumph. It was a love story that began with fear and ended with peace, that started with escape and ended with home, that transformed 2 broken souls into one beautiful whole. It was, simply put, a love story for the ages, as enduring as the mountains that had witnessed its beginning and as precious as the gold that had drawn so many to the Black Hills all those years ago. And though Jacob and Clara had long since returned to the earth, their love remained, a beacon of hope and inspiration to all who heard their tale. In the end, that was their true legacy, not the children they had raised or the town they had helped build, but the simple, powerful truth that love, real love, the kind that stands guard at bedroom doors and chooses courage over comfort, can transform everything. It can turn a frightened girl into a strong woman, a hardened soldier into a devoted husband, and a desperate escape into the beginning of a beautiful life. And so their story ends where all the best love stories end, not with death, but with the promise of eternity. Not with an ending, but with the assurance that what they built together would last forever, carried forward in the hearts and lives of all who came after them, a testament to the enduring power of love that protects, love that perseveres, and love that never, ever fails.